before having a tough conversation with anybody,
Right.
an addicted person or anything, you should be in a mindset that you're the worst sinner that you know. Welcome to episode 4 of Beyond Sobriety. I am Jim Quigley. This is my friend Todd Timot, and we're smiling because it's taken me a while to learn how to say his last name properly.
It's only been 3 years.
Only been 3 years. So it's been 3 years.
Yeah.
So I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. I certainly did. We had our annual Thanksgiving dinner here at Freedom Farm, and my mom got to come up and spend 10 days up here, and that was enjoyable. She brought her husband Malenko with her, and we had a good time. We were getting ready for Christmas, but we took a week off for the show, which I'm sure we will do during the Christmas break too.
Yeah.
And as far as today's show goes, Todd was inspired last night by a topic, so I'm going to defer to him to introduce today's topic.
Okay. All right. So the topic that that kind of came to me last night was, with it being the holidays and with a lot of parents and a lot of families getting together that maybe haven't seen each other for a year, or maybe you're getting kids home from college, those kinds of things. If you've got concerns about how to tell if maybe your child or your loved one is using drugs or using alcohol, we kind of wanted to go over some of the ways that you might be able to tell that. And if you have that suspicion, how can you confront them and kind of make it a biblical conversation, a good conversation that shows that you're concerned about them, rather than just something that's divisive and pushes them off further away. So how can you handle it in a biblical way, and how can you tell if they're using drugs? So the first thing we're going to do is dive into what are some ways that you can tell if your loved one is using drugs.
So what is always very helpful is know some of the physical effects that drugs can have on a person. The eyes, they can be very revealing. For anybody that has ever had somebody that was, for instance, an opiate abuser, the pupils of your eyes, they call it pinning. They get so small, they look like maybe they're as small as the head of a ballpoint pen. And this is a sure sign that they are on opiates. Now, if you get a little confused on whether maybe it's the lighting, a little trick is just to kind of casually look at other people's pupils to see, and you can quickly see that their pupils are not normal. Now that's drug specific. Now people's pupils can also be extremely dilated,
right?
Which happens from more uppers or benzodiazepams. Actually, will do that too. Will make your eyes. So anyway, without getting lost on what drug they are on, pupils can really can be a indicator that somebody is on a substance, because a lot of times the story when it comes to having a loved one that's on drugs is that they're able to kind of keep it under wraps in public pretty well. You know, they know just enough to where they can be on something to where maybe their behavior isn't really that abnormal, but you kind of just know something's wrong.
What would be some of those clues that the behavioral type clues that might clue you in that something is wrong?
Sure. So this is something that I actually try to get loved ones to just be confident in themselves, because this is what I mean. I'm not trying to there's no prescription. You know your loved one, okay? You know when they're acting out of character, right? And the thing is that a lot of times you get challenged in your heart. You're like, well, I don't want to ruin, they're acting a little overjoyed or over happy or a little too friendly or sociable. And I don't want to I don't want to to ruin the mood or ruin the event. So I'm not going to say anything, but your conviction is ringing like, crazy that there's
Right.
something wrong.
You just tell that they just don't feel right. They're not
Exactly.
themselves.
Right. So, parents, I'm speaking to parents, especially if you are a believer. The Lord gives you discernment, and trust it. And usually, in my experience talking to parents, they talk themselves out of the actual discernment that the Lord is giving them. They're like, something's wrong, something's wrong. Well, I just didn't want to, like I said, I didn't want to offend them. I didn't want to um, spoil the day. I wasn't sure. There's a lot of, look, just listen to what the Lord is telling you. Okay, I know that sounds a little kind of mystic and supernatural and spiritual, and it is. The Lord gives you indications when people close to you, loved ones, when there's something wrong.
So if you don't mind talking a little bit about it, what when you were growing up and when you started having these issues, how did your parents notice it? How did they approach you about it so that you could so that they were obviously concerned about you? How did they show that concern? How did the discussion start in your life?
So, unfortunately, they didn't happen enough.
Yeah.
In my substance abuse, and this is where I get a lot of this knowledge from, is that my loved ones made the mistake, where they didn't want to, they weren't sure, but they were sure, so they didn't say anything. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I've had many conversations with them afterwards where I've said, didn't something kind of indicate to you that there was something wrong that day? And they said, actually, yeah, I totally remember. I totally remember there was a problem. They usually didn't react. My family didn't usually react until they got hard evidence. They didn't really go on on any kind of a discerning conviction. It was more of they needed hard evidence before they would, because this is the other thing. If you have a loved one struggling with substance abuse, they will punish you if you do come at them with just a discerning. They will
an accusation
without art evidence. They know they can just punish you, so they will make you feel bad for doing so. And usually that's another sign that there is something wrong when they would do something like that. I often, let me give you just an example of what I mean. Of course, I work in a treatment facility, Freedom Farm, that guys live with us 24/7 for a year. So obviously there's guys that we will get an indication that there's something wrong. So we will single them out and bring them in and just start on a conversation. Hey, look, I don't want to offend you, right? But you're here because you want us to help you with your life and transformation and the struggle that you came here with, substance abuse. Right now, I'm just kind of a little concerned. Here are some of the reasons why I'm concerned. You've been sleeping a lot. You've missed some work. You've been sick. You look a little sickly. So I'm just going to do a drug screening. We just had this happen a couple weeks ago, and the person literally said, "I cannot believe you're doing this to me on this day of the week. I'm leaving." And they just left. So what do you think that was? Do you think that there was something wrong, or do you think that that they were really just offended for being falsely accused? So just remember that when there's a big like hoopla made because of the accusation, I try to tell guys all the time, like, you know what, today, I mean, I'm almost a decade now. If someone says, "Hey, I want to give you a drug test. You've been acting
a little strange."
I'd be like, let's go, let's go, because I want to clear this air right off the bat because I'm confident that that's not the problem. But I can understand why someone get a little offended about it. But the overbearing defense and all that usually is a strong indicator that there's actually something wrong.
So then that goes into naturally leads into if you have these suspicions, if you have this discernment, or if you see some of these signs in your loved one, how do you approach it so that you don't cut off the relationship, so that you don't damage the relationship or get punished? Maybe you just talked us through how you do it with somebody that's here at Freedom Farm, but how do you do it when it's a loved one, when it's your son, when it's your husband, when it's your grandfather, whatever it might be?
So this is a famous passage when it comes to biblical counseling. This is the passage I go to when people want to understand what biblical counseling is. But this is Galatians 6. It says, "Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." That says so much because it gives us the charge that we need to go, and our motivation is restoration for this person. It also tells us how we do it. In the preceding chapter, it talked about what it's like to walk in the Spirit. So you need to be, if you are a spiritual person, that's described in chapter 5, somebody that's walking in the Spirit. And it says one word here specifically, you do this in a spirit of gentleness. So this is where I think a lot of I think Hollywood has probably ruined, and maybe just kind of, I don't know, our culture here in America, but those conversations usually like, I'm the parent, you're the child, even though you're 40, I'm still your parent, and I'm going to confront you, you're going to act offended at me, and then I'm going to dominate by trying to push back in an anger and remind you you're my child and all that kind of stuff. You will certainly lose in that type of scenario, because you're basically giving them the reason now where they can just go ahead and escape from this because you've been mean. It actually warns us not to come in a different spirit because we could be tempted to get caught up in the scenario, So yeah, you want to be prayed up. I guess that's the best way to say it. You want to be motivated properly. You want your fears to be resting in you, and this conversation is not going to be what changes them, but it could be the catalyst that God uses to change them. You need to have that ready in your mind, and you need to do it. Okay, you need to take the responsibility to go in and confront. And you can tell somebody, like, there's nothing wrong with telling somebody how uncomfortable this is for you to do.
Right.
Already answer those questions that you're usually trying to not let them know what's going on in your mind. Look, this is really uncomfortable for me to do, but man, something is just really pinging on my heart that there's something wrong, and you've had a history of substance abuse, and look, the last thing I want to do is ruin any of this holiday, but something's wrong. I'd like you to do me this favor, and let's clear the air so that I know that it's not this, because that's the last thing I want. But if you are in trouble, we need to address it. Does that make sense?
It does. I think one of the things that when I've handled conflict, and obviously sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't go so well, but when it's went well, typically with my kids, it's if you lead with, I'm concerned about you, I see these indicators that give me concern, and can you tell me what's going on, and kind of just let them talk, and don't judge what they're saying, and don't jump in and interrupt, but let them tell the story and ask meaningful questions, and you can ask meaningful questions of them and help them clarify what they mean when they say things, and those kinds of things. Don't be accusatory. Don't automatically jump to the assumption, even if they do have a prior history. Don't automatically jump to the assumption that because they've got strange behavior that's what's going on here as well. But be patient with them. Be patient with yourself, and just don't tackle it as, like Jim said, don't tackle it as I'm here to fix this problem, because we can't fix any problems. Only God can fix those problems. But tackle it as I'm here to help however I can, and that includes listening to you and helping. Now, so that kind of leads us then to a.
Well, I want to say
okay, go ahead.
one thing. This just reminded me a couple times that I was confronted growing up. There was threats like that they were going to give me a drug test or like that, and no follow through. And so make sure you follow through, because what my folks were trying to do back then was to see if I would give indication that I was scared, right? That I would just admit it without having to follow through with the drug test. Look, you can go to Walgreens and get a 12-panel drug test, no problem. I think Todd can make a link available through for a lab that you can send away a urine sample for testing for synthetics, which you got to have that plan to actually how you're going to test somebody. A urine test is one way. You can actually go to a lot of urgent care places, and they can even do a hair follicle test. But you need to know what they're testing for, because some places only test for 4 things, 6 things, 12 things. So you gotta have that already understood. And if you're going to administer a drug test, you got to make sure you know how to do that, okay? Because I have passed drug tests before because we are crafty people when we're in it. We are manipulative. I mean, I buffaloed a whole drug treatment center when 60 people were trying to get me kicked out because I was a narc and I had used, and I figured out a way to get past the drug test. Even after they got a sample and they threw it out and gave me a cup and said they wanted me to give them another sample, I still got around it. So I can tell you that story another time, but follow through, but know what you're doing too, as far as on how to administer a test, because I know that if you have a loved one that struggles with substance abuse, I don't have to explain to you how manipulative people can be, and they're very, very good at playing on emotions. And there's nothing going on. Sure. I mean, I've literally done this. Sure, I'll take a drug test. And then at that point, you're convinced there's nothing going on because of the way they responded calmly and everything like that. I'll take a drug test. Okay, well, we don't need to do that. I can see the way you're responding. We don't need to give a drug. Follow through. Give the drug test.
So there's 2 possible responses from somebody. Either when this approached with this kind of conversation, they're either going to admit to using or not, or they're going to deny. And so how do you handle each one? I mean, if they're, like, for instance, you've got a child that's home from college, you think they've been using, and now you've started this conversation, and they're just adamant that they have not used and that they would not use and all that kind of stuff. So where do you go from here?
I don't think there's going to be any kind of where I can lay out a prescription on what you do, but just give maybe some pointers, okay? Mm-hmm. Here's one major pointer. Don't let your child that's dependent on you for stuff, especially if you're helping support them in college, tell you that it's not your right to ask them these types of questions, okay? Because it totally is your right. I don't care how old they are. If you are supporting them financially, and financially doesn't need to mean you're writing them a check or putting money in their account. You're giving them a place to live. You're paying for a vehicle. Some way their life would not be possible without your help. Then you have all the right in the world to ask them these questions. And that's another big thing to look into. If someone denies, follow money, okay? Look at money. Look at bank records, because that's a huge indicator a lot of times. I'll never forget the time my father did that to me. He didn't ask. He just, and I was living with him, and he just ripped open my bank statement that came in the mail, and he went through and circled all these cash withdrawals, and he saw all these cash deposits. And what I literally was doing was I was withdrawing money, buying drugs, selling drugs, putting that money back in to cover a check I'd written. I mean, he had saw what I was doing. And when I got confronted, I I use the "how dare you look at my stuff" defense. And anyway, but so if someone acts in denial, I would say investigate, okay, and you have the right to investigate, especially if that person is dependent on you. If they're not dependent on you and they're in denial, you can tell them simply like, "Look, I love you. I am asking you as someone that I love to help clear this up for me. If you're not willing to love me back and do this, then you know what? We just have to love you at a distance at this point. You know, I still will talk to you and whatnot, but I mean, create some boundaries. Okay, I don't know what those boundaries look like. Create some boundaries there. If someone admits, hey, then we got to get a plan then to start investigating how bad it is. And again, this is where it gets a little touchy. They may famously, people will admit to just enough to satisfy the curiosity that obviously you have, but it's actually a lot worse than what they're admitting to. So you got to be careful. If someone says, yes, you're right, they might have a tendency to give you some story that's not really accurate on what the situation. So there's going to be investigation needed on both ends, and I think that you really need to really try to get down to the bottom. This going to take a little work, you know.
Well, the other thing I would say is if they're denying that they have an issue and they're not like emotional about it or what, they're just like, no, that's not an issue, well, the easiest way to disprove or to prove that what they're saying is true is, okay, well, take this drug test.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they agree to do that, then problem solved, issue over, and you can do that. But so assuming that they do have an issue, whether they choose to address it right now or not, how do you, as the family member that cares about them, how do you help them without enabling their behavior?
So I would suggest, and again, it's going to be different for every situation. So let's say you have somebody that is like seriously back into it. I mean, they're really deep into it. Then there may be need for them to go to treatment again, a place like Freedom Farm, or a place in what I would say the TAC network. Friends of ours over at the Addiction Connection, they have lists of places throughout the country that would be good places to go to. Or maybe they're not. They've had a relapse, but they haven't gotten to this severe degree like they had once been. So maybe this is like going to your church and getting a plan together and helping keep them accountable to that plan. But unfortunately, a lot of times the plans and then the accountability to it, that's when a lot of times there's some failure there keeping people accountable, staying on it. You'll get someone that does well for a couple weeks and then kind of all goes to the wayside again. So so there could be different ways to address it depending upon the severity of what the situation is the person back into.
But if we go back to like the kid coming home from college and they say, okay, yes, I have been using and I do want help. That's a huge conversation at that point because sure. Do they drop out of school? Do they keep going to school? For what it's worth, most universities, most schools do have those kinds of services on campus that they can go to and get some help with. It typically, very rarely would it be biblical counseling, biblical help that they would get. It will be secular alcohol or drug treatment, but it is still somebody to help keep them accountable and stuff. So, you might investigate that. But that's a discussion that you would want to have. Any advice as far as that goes? If it's that college kid or that, just a kid that you see once a year, how would you go about
one piece of advice,
advising, assuming that they're fairly new, not that they've been using for years, but that this is the first time or kind of toward the front end of somebody's.
So one piece of advice just kind of rings in my mind right now. There are so many people that are involved in life progressing, right? And then an issue like this comes up, and then they have to deal with a possible decision on pausing their life progression in order to address this this problem, and the thought of that is just like, well, I will get behind if I got to take a year off college, or obviously we have this conversation a lot. We ask people for a year commitment to come to Freedom Farm. Like I can't give a whole year. Unfortunately, people that don't like pause life and say, I need to take this seriously. I really need to address this. What ends up happening is that they try to go on and they end up postponing their life much further than if they had just taken the time off. So understanding that, like pausing life progress on something like college or a career path or starting a family or getting married because this needs some serious attention, could end up saving a lot of time, if that makes sense, and trying to communicate that message to the loved one. A lot of times it's hard for them to get that in their head, but I mean, it's totally true. It's like
in addition to that thought, there's there are things that really truly affect your life, as in your ability to live, like drug use, and when those kinds of things come in, and it's time to prioritize some things, is getting my life right and getting it fixed and getting a solid foundation and a drug-free foundation, alcohol-free or, foundation, getting that problem addressed in my life is, that really is a primary problem in your life, where pushing college off a year or two, or pushing a job off for a year or two, or pushing a marriage off a year or two, typically those are secondary considerations. I mean, yes, they're important, and yes, we want things to go like we want them to go, but drug use, that's something that needs to be handled as a primary concern in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I often have this conversation like, look, I want you in college. I want you to pursue your marriage. I want you to get your kids back. I want you followed by whatever it is that they're having to consider putting off. The thing is that unless they address this problem and they go try to pursue those things without addressing this problem, they're not going to get any of those things.
Right.
So you just got to try to make that point to them. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people are a little overconfident and they think they can do both.
We're all selfish.
They don't take the issue seriously enough, and we see the constant destruction that is caused by substance abuse.
So by way of wrapping this up, any last minute advice or last thoughts that you've had as we're talking this, so we can finish up for today?
Absolutely. So look, parents and loved ones that have people that have struggled with substance abuse in the past, or you think you are, if there's something pinging on your heart, listen to it, okay? And don't listen to the fears that you start telling yourself that would stifle you from going and confronting someone. You can confront people about hard things in life, and you can do it in a biblical way, a spiritual way. You can do it in a Christ-centered way, and it's actually a good thing to do. Okay, so around the holidays, you're going to see a lot of people. If anybody's out there listening, don't ignore an opportunity to maybe take someone aside that you are concerned about, have a private conversation with them, trusting the Lord's going to do His work through you obeying Him and coming alongside somebody that's caught in a transgression of any kind, or you suspect is. The Lord's going to do His work. Read any letter to the churches in the New Testament if you need.
Which those would be
anything from Romans to Jude. There you go. Okay, these are all letters written to churches of people that were struggling, and Paul, the author of most of them, is saying, "Hey, look, you guys are doing this." He's confronting them. He's reminding them of the salvation that they had in the Lord, and he's reminding them of the power that is available to them as they turn their lives back to Him for their lives. And this is very appropriate. It's totally New Testament church activity that we need to be involved in. It's not someone else's problem if you are getting the pings on your heart about the problem. Okay,
Right.
don't let somebody else deal with it. Maybe the Lord wants you to deal with it. If you need any help, reach out to us through email or anything like that. We'd be happy to try to give you more specific advice to your specific situations. But it's not something that we can just give a general blanket answer for every individual situation. So,
But like I think it was James that says, if you know the good that you should do and you don't do it, that is sin to you. And so that kind of goes along with your point there. If you know that this is, or if you suspect that something is going on in your, whether it's drug abuse or it's some other sin, you need to have these godly conversations, with these tough conversations with your loved ones, so that maybe it won't get worse, so that maybe that you can restore the relationship back between the two of you, as well as between them and God. So
one last thing, before having a tough conversation with anybody, an addicted person or anything, you should be in a mindset that you're the worst sinner that you know. If that helps. That has been like kind of a thing that's been rolling around in my head for quite some time in school and whatnot. You're always at a disadvantage if you're looking at the person across from you as a worse sinner than you. Be of the mindset that, like Paul, that he was the worst sinner that he knew.
Right, like the old saying goes, the ground at the foot of the cross is level. We're all the same height.
Absolutely.
We're all just as terrible as anyone else is. So, well, that puts episode number 4 in the books. Any questions, go ahead and leave comments either on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you might see this video. We're also posting these on our website at beyondsobriety.org. You can actually sign up for our email list there so that you can be notified when we put new episodes out, as well as that obviously gives you an email avenue to talk to us as well if you want to do that. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.